Well, today I am absolutely delighted to welcome back for another set of punishment for Colin Ellis to the third time he's been on the show. Colin is one of the world's foremost authorities on workplace culture. He's a global workplace culture expert sought after by organizations around the world to help build vibrant, high-performing cultures. And he's an author of 4 books: Culture Fix, how to create a great work. I need new glasses. I haven't even got them on. How to create a great place to work, and the award-winning project book, The Complete Guide to Consistently Delivering Great Projects. He's a regular speaker at conferences and events around the world, and is featured in media outlets such as Harvard Business Review, Sky News, and the BBC. And his latest book, which he's going to talk to us a little bit about today, is Detox Your Culture: Deliver Results, Retain Staff, and Strengthen Your Organization's Reputation. And it's literally out last month. I saw a picture of him stood by a sign recently, so I know there's evidence there. He takes a highly successful and unique approach to culture, building by teaching employees how to build and evolve it themselves. And today he's worked with almost 100 different cultures in almost 20 different countries, from Red Bull in Austria to the US House of Representatives to the Dutch Olympic team and IAG Insurance in Australia. Well, that's a long intro, Colin. Welcome to the show.
That's longer than the podcast, Nigel. Thanks for having me. I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you again for coming on again. For those who may not have heard you on the show before, how very dare you, listeners? You should have done. Tell us a little bit about your background. I think some people might have picked up an accent there.
Yeah, just a little bit of an accent. Yeah, it's like Peter Kay on Parkinson. You're Parkinson, by the way. I'll be Peter Kay for this one. So
as long as you're not what's the name, Oliver Reed.
Yeah, no, not Oliver. I've had my time as Oliver Reed, but definitely not now. When I was a lot younger, growing up in the mean streets of Liverpool. Although somebody accused me last week of not having a proper Scouse accent, but that's what happens when you live outside Liverpool for 17 years. You know, especially in Australia, they beat it out of you. So a little bit of background. I mean, we've just done a 50-minute intro, so I'll tell you where my interest in teamwork arises from, and this is something that we talked about in a previous podcast. Is my first managerial role was as a project manager for year 2000 projects, and at that stage my remit was to build what we would now call a high-performing team to deliver year 2000 projects over a 3-year period. I was working for what was then the Trinity newspaper group. And so I became really interested in how do we build these really great team cultures in order to deliver. And, you know, as I've talked about in previous podcasts, I really wanted to master the art of project management, which for me was all about leadership, culture, methods, but a lot of the emphasis was on the method. And so, you know, kind of over time, we emigrated to New Zealand in 2007. I took up a public service senior management role in 2007, heading up project departments. Moved to Australia in 2013 to head up projects in government there as well. And I've been working for myself, Nigel, for the last 8 years. You just mentioned all of the people that I've worked for and the countries that I've worked in, which has probably only happened in the last 6 years, to be honest, because culture is one of those things that people love talking about. But they don't actually really invest in it that much, other than sending everyone on a diversity, equity, and inclusion training program every now and again. So I'm in London at the minute. This is where we're in the process of moving back to the UK, because this is where our kids want to study. And as you said, I just launched a new book. So there you go, a little bit about me.
Brilliant. So obviously you've written 3 books on culture, 2 books on culture before. So why do we need another one?
Yeah, actually, this is my 4th. So it's my 4th. The first book I wrote on culture, I wanted to buy a book that told me how to build a really great team, and there wasn't one. There were some good culture books, don't get me wrong. There was The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. There was The Culture Map by Erin Mayer. But there was no how-to guide. And so I decided that I would write one. You know, I would deconstruct culture. So that was my first book. The second book then was all about, well, here's some little hacks that people can use because people often find it hard to do culture, and they'll say it's too culture change is too hard. So I just did a different hack every fortnight, from changing your email to running an offsite. The third one was all about hybrid work, kind of post-COVID or during COVID, when I was just flat out busy helping organizations to redefine their cultures. And so I kind of summarized how to build a great hybrid workplace. And this one is all about how to avoid kind of slipping into a toxic culture, because it's never been more popular in the media, toxic culture. So I really want to help organizations to avoid it, because not only does it have a massive impact on human life, and I've worked with organizations where people have committed suicide, unfortunately, but also it has a massive impact on company results. So you think senior leaders would want to do something about it. So I provide some kind of case studies, some examples of things that have gone wrong, but also it's a real risk management book. I like to think, is here's a bunch of things that if you do these things, you'll avoid the conditions for toxicity.
Oh, brilliant. So that, I suppose that's thinking of people who are kind of culture. It's kind of, what can I do about it? I can't do anything about it. I'm a project manager in a team. Maybe I'm a portfolio director, a program manager. I'm in an organisation that's several thousand people. I've got a team of 20 people. Yeah, I can't do anything about that. But, but I know that obviously culture is kind of bottom up in some ways. But what do you? If I said to you, how do you define culture in the context of what we're talking about? What would you say it is? Because obviously, culture can be um, a country can have a certain culture, and a group within there can have a certain culture. What in your context with the industry and business cultures? What do you define that as, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, so I always describe culture as the day-to-day lived experiences of employees. Now, those employees, as you rightly say, could be working on a project, Nigel. They could be working in a country. They could be working in headquarters. They could be working for HR. They could be engineers in the field. They could be a football team, all of whom I've worked with. And I think what we try and do, and culture, by the way, is 100% ground up. And where organizations often get it wrong is by trying to make culture top down. And so if leaders tell us what the culture is, it immediately disempowers us. It erodes the sense of belonging, because people are telling us what it is rather than encouraging us to define how it should be. And so if you're a project manager, if you're any kind of manager, culture is the thing that you will become known for. Now, I recognize this in 1997, and it was down to the fact that I had a really good boss. He said to me, he said, the way that we deliver these projects is by working as a team, which is kind of standard for what everybody is told as a manager. But then he said, and it's your job to work with them to define what that looks like. And they were his words. Now, this was my first managerial job. I didn't, like most managers, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I now run a basic management program because organizations are still rubbish at this. But I didn't have a clue how to be a manager. But that stuck in my head. Oh, it's up to me. It's up to me to make sure that I work with the team so that we can define what that culture looks like. And you have certain guardrails. So, for example, now you have a set of values. There are things that you have to link it to. There are certain policies, particularly around, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. You want to make sure you're saying the right things and doing the right things by people. You want to acknowledge the kind of neurodiverse nature of our work, for example. So that all this is part of the management education. But actually, as a team, if you come together and define how you want to work, then immediately there's a sense of responsibility for it. So everybody wants to pitch in, everybody wants to safeguard it. I worked with a pharmaceutical team recently, and I'd worked with another team in their organization whose engagement score had gone up 27%, I think it was, in less than 3 months. And they were like, well, we want to do whatever they did. And so, my job is to facilitate a process whereby they make agreements with each other. And then when they leave the room, they uphold those agreements. It sounds simple. It's really complicated, Nigel, obviously. But it's a simple process during the 2 days. And their engagement score went up in 10%. And I was talking to the senior management recently. She said, I only just realized she said about 3 weeks afterwards, I'm not telling anybody anymore that we have to be better as a team. She said, if anything, they're telling me and my leadership team all of the great stuff that they've done that we should do too. So I think that's the nature of culture. It is ground up, but it's what managers will be known for, providing they do it in the right way.
It's interesting. 'Cause it's one of those. I've heard the phrase before now. Is your reputation is what people say about you when you're not there, and it kind of it makes me think of that in the fact that how if your team behave autonomously without a manager there, without that director, but have that principles. And we may have talked about this before. The Southwest Airlines comes
Yeah.
to mind. The book, forget the guy's name. I read the book, that book about the way that they approached empowerment with their team and the fact that they could go out. And another one I listened to recently was an interview with the guy who started Pret. And very early on, one of the things they gave was to say, well, anyone can give someone a free coffee, whatever. At one point, it's kind of like, give them a free coffee, give them a muffin, give them a whatever. And you don't need a reason to. If a customer comes in, they look sad, give them a coffee, make their experience better. Well, because you had independent managers who were directed to be achieve goals, achieve targets, profit margins, or whatever, they kind of stopped people doing it. And they got to the point where they had to get a button on the tills where the staff who gave some away pressed the button. And then they would see, and they'd be able to go to these managers and say, well, you're not giving away stuff. Why aren't you giving away stuff? Because otherwise they didn't know. And in order to help them build that experience, that kind of, I wonder whether that feels like a cultural thing as well as about enabling the individual on the shop floor to engage with the customer in a way that they wouldn't do otherwise, unless you told them they could do, and that would be expected of them.
Yeah, I just wrote a blog, Nigel, about I went to Ronnie Scott's jazz bar in London for my birthday recently, and the experience that they provided to us as a customer was a masterclass in culture. And so I captured all of these things. I always talk about the fact that inspiration for employee culture lives everywhere. And I think if there's one, not that I want people to stop listening to this podcast right now, but if there's one lesson I want, or one thing I want people to take away from this, is that you really have autonomy over your culture. Notwithstanding the guardrails, the values, and whatever's been defined that you have to work towards. But you really have this opportunity to define the experience. And it's what I became known for. When we emigrated to New Zealand in 2007, I remember my boss in New Zealand, I was working for a state-owned enterprise. He'd sacked his entire leadership team. And he brought a bunch of us in. He's like, I want something different. I want something different. I remember after 3 months, he said to me, he's like, Colin, remember we had the conversation when we started and I said I wanted something different? I was like, yeah, Jim. He was like, I just wasn't expecting it to be this different. And me and my team, we just agreed to do some just stuff that people weren't doing in government. That he said, "Oh, am I paying?" I'm like, "No, is the taxpayer paying?" No. He's like, "Why are you going go-karting on a Monday afternoon?" I'm like, "Because we had a really good week last week. We want to celebrate success, and I'm paying for the team to do something a bit of adrenaline." And the team had decided that that's what they wanted to do. I wasn't telling them. And he said, "Can I come?" I was like, "No." It's a celebration of our team, but I would only do that if we were achieving our targets. And at that time, the previous year we delivered the company had delivered 47% of projects on time to budget. And we transformed that in a year to 76%. And as someone who works in projects, it's really hard to deliver a portfolio of projects on time to budget, 3/4 of them, when the conditions change so frequently. And we work in a telecommunications, so it's changing all the time. But we just did little things. We did gratitude days before they even became a thing. We found different ways to use technology. We didn't email each other. That was the day of Blackberries, when Blackberries were a thing. I had a fruit bowl and made people put their phones in fruit bowls so they wouldn't check them. This is in 2007. People still aren't doing this now. So all of those little things, Nigel, all of these things contribute to the culture. And you're absolutely right. Culture is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Also, culture is what happens when you're not there. And I think my proudest moment as a manager was when I found out about an issue in the team, maybe 3 weeks after it had occurred. Someone mentioned something. I kind of looked at them quizzically. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh, you don't need to worry about it. We dealt with it. We didn't need to get you involved." And what they did, my team, was they held each other to account. We had really high performance standards. You never had to shout, never had to bawl, never had to raise your voice, because we just knew what we wanted to get done, and we set the bar really high and jumped over it pretty much every time.
It's interesting because that holding each other to account, and I find it quite difficult with high performing examples for teams where I'm in an organisation where um, and I've worked in multiple different organisations, and there are people there who are really passionate about the organisation. There are people there who are okay; they like the organisation, they enjoy working there. There are people who are it's just transitional for them, and there's the odd person who doesn't like being there. And I suppose it's similar, but you kind of look at sports teams, and then you'll have or military groups that work together to solve something amazing, or there's a big disaster and people come together. And sometimes I sit there, it's that shared goal of like football teams. I'm down the road from Wrexham, so obviously Wrexham at the moment have got a culture there that's being created by that team, and you watch those teams, they've got that shared goal, and it's really clear what that shared goal is: win this game. And you will see situations, I think, where you will have team members absolutely ripping into someone else on the pitch. And I've listened to a couple of sports people who are talking about the fact, but that's fine on the pitch, and that's what we do because you're holding that person to account for them making a mistake, selling you a bad pass or not doing what they should position or whatever. And but it's that ability to hold each other to account and move forward. And I find it more difficult to translate that kind of thing into an office scenario where you're delivering a project and it's going to happen, and it's not particularly exciting. It's not, I mean, it's not. You can imagine getting excited about trying to win a football game and get a promotion. You try see how in engaging it can be. Although maybe it's me, maybe I'm the problem there. But for doing something in a military sense or emergency services and those sort of things, there's a shared goal of getting it done, and you get it done, and you all pull there. There's less intensity in the office environment, is there? To the implications of someone not doing something on time is much smaller, and therefore more likely to happen. I just think about how do you translate that high performance culture in that is in an easier environment in my mind, because you've got a golden ticket of we've got to win the game at all costs. That's the thing. Win the game at all costs. How do you translate? How do you move those between organisations that are fairly straightforward? Paper mill company selling paper.
Yes. Yeah, Dunder Mifflin.
Yeah,
I've just been watching The Office. That's why that was immediately in my mind. Just been watching the US. How do you prepare for it?
Yeah, so, we're talking about Peter Kay and all that stuff, and it's just like that. That kind of popped into me as being a tangential one.
So, what somebody asked me in an interview once, Nigel, how do you prepare for podcasts and speeches? I said I always watch comedy. It just puts me in the right frame of mind. High performance, right? Let's talk about high performance. High performance is what you make it. And for me, there's no distinction between Manchester City, Wrexham, or a project delivering, I don't know, a new switch in the far north of Scotland, right? Let's say there's a team of 6 people working on that. My brother's an infrastructure engineer, so I'm giving him a little mention there. It's about what you make it, and I think the work is often as mundane as the people around you. And so when you actually take the time to build something that you're excited to be part of. Now, when I say excited, I mean there'll be plenty of skeptical, cynical people on the podcast, no doubt, saying, "Oh, well, how do you get excited about work?" Well, we spend a third of our lives with the people that we work with, so why wouldn't you try and create the conditions for success. My biggest client is probably Red Bull. The drinks company, you mentioned them there in Austria. One of the projects I worked with them last year was to actually, because they wanted something different, right? I think often what we do within our workplaces is we do the same thing over and over again, but we expect a different result, right? It's that whole definition of insanity. And when I worked with Red Bull, the remit from the CEO of Red Bull was, we want people to think about culture differently. We want them to talk about it differently. We want them to take the excitement back to the office with them. So we brought like 100 people together in Austria, and I worked with the global learning and development team, who were awesome. And we designed this program, which I then delivered, about getting people excited about culture. And I was speaking to one of the general managers recently, and he said, we still love talking about culture. It's like, even though we're coming to work and you've got people working on brand and marketing and sales, and people are out driving minis, giving cans of Red Bull, people are excited about what they can co-create together to actually get the work done. And so, I spoke to a former teammate of mine recently. She's got her own podcast. She was like, "Oh my God!" She's like, "I used to love our work together, and it was awesome. And all we did was just random little things, Nigel, to get people excited about our interactions on a day-to-day basis." Now, often people will say, "Oh, well, COVID changed all that, hybrid work changed all that." It only changed it for the people who lacked creativity. It only changed it for the organizations that it didn't actually redefine their culture either during COVID or immediately post-COVID. A lot of people said, right, okay, the culture's changed. We're going to implement Microsoft Teams, rather than, right, what's our new value set? Right, okay, what's our behaviors? How do we need to train managers in a different way to make sure we set and hold people to expectations? As we're recording this, Amazon have just announced they're bringing their staff back to the office 5 days a week, which might be right for them. I'm not going to judge them one way or the other. For me, though, it's a failure of not redefining their culture for the modern working world. Yeah, but that's just me. So I think high performance is really what you make it. And if you work together as a team to define what high performance means for you, and it's always a professional sports team limit, and then you actually take the time to make the decisions and start saying no and bring the energy and the intrinsic motivation to your job on a daily basis, it can be just as exciting.
It's an interesting challenge on that. Interesting. It's something I need to think about. And I think what I sit there sometimes and think, and maybe I do think about the culture when I'm delivering projects, but I don't. I think a lot of people do, but it transforms into the face of, you think about what we do. It's Seth Godin I heard talk about this. Is kind of things of what people like us do, things like that.
That's right.
Or
Yeah.
people like us are like this and that.
Yeah.
And we all have that little bit in us. And that's where me as a project manager, portfolio manager, the way we do portfolio manager, project management, we do this. We always do these things. And there's certain things that I always do there, and I always put into place with my teams that I'm getting involved in. I try to build relationships with people, and there's certain cadence that I like to build in. And I suppose these are all things that create an element of the culture, but you don't realise that how your influence of those daily behaviours. And I don't think of them as I've got a project, I'm putting a culture into this project, which is on a Monday at 10:30, we all get together, we have a conversation about where we are in progress, we agree what we're going to do, you know what I mean? Or whether it's daily stand-ups or whatever those things are. I wonder whether there's a way that I can do that and with a more culture focus, to think, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing it for culture. Actually, is that going to create the culture I want by doing it? Because I don't think I proactively do that. And do you get down to that level with some of these organisations and people, the individuals really, to challenge them on how their actions and think about their actions affect the culture?
So I'm gonna keep talking about culture until it kills me. One of my friends said to me recently, there's like, I just don't know where you get the energy to keep talking about the same things. The reason that, so let me just make a couple of statements. So culture is the number one determinant of organization success, right? So it has been proven time and time again, and all of the research I use in all of the books, right, that if you put time, thought, money, and effort into building culture, you get the results. You hit your project milestones, you achieve your sales, you achieve reputation, all of these things. But Nigel, and it was the same for me as it is for you, no one teaches you how to build culture. No one teaches you what it is. No one breaks it down. The onus is on you to go and buy a book like Culture Fix, where I broke it down, or you can buy Detox Your Culture, which repeats some of that stuff, and learn it and then put it into practice. Or you do what I did when I was a manager. I used to have a little book, and I used to write down all of the good things that I saw people doing and all of the bad things that I saw people doing. You know, one of my managers threw a stapler across the room, right? And I wrote in my book, "Don't throw things." Right? I was about 30.
I was wondering which one it was going to go into.
Yeah, had it been in Liverpool, it would have been a good thing, but it wasn't. Yeah, it's a term of endearment when someone throws a stapler at you in Liverpool. Oh, you did that for me. But no one teaches you, Nigel. No one and so this is my issue, right? Whenever an organisation wants to work on its culture, what they do is more top-down activity, right? So they'll either send you on a DEI course, right? Which is, again, that's not a bad thing to do, but that's a guardrail. It's not the culture itself. Rather than saying, right, what we need is a brand new management development program to help our managers, because middle managers are the difference, right? Leaders are too far removed from the day-to-day work, and we don't want them in the day-to-day work anyway, because it's their job to make strategic decisions about the future and make sure that they deliver the outcomes and either shareholder value or public service value for money. So middle managers are the difference. I worked with a council, a local council in Australia, and so one of the things I hear all the time is we haven't got money for culture. I'm like, all right, well, you reap what you sow, right? You get the culture you choose to build. And if you're not choosing to build it, then, you've only got yourselves to blame. This company paid 6 figures, right, to work with me to train all of their managers. And they won an award. They won an award for one of the best cultures in Australia, right? Now, no kudos to me here. All I did was teach them about culture. They had to do the hard bit of actually implementing it on a daily basis. They had to motivate themselves. They had to motivate each other. They had to have difficult conversation. They had to set expectations. They had to define the behaviors that they were going to demonstrate within their small team in relation to the values that the organization had. They had to stay focused on the targets that they had and make decisions in line with that. All of these things, right, are part of a basic 2-day management program. I had one guy said to me, he said, I've been a manager for 30 years. He was retiring. Well, he'll have retired now. And he said, I could have done with this 30 years ago. So it's exactly the same as what you're saying, is no one teaches you, and then no one gives you the autonomy to say, you know what, Nigel, you've got the knowledge now. As long as you build a great team culture in line with our values, and as long as you and your team stay focused on the milestones that you've got to deliver, the outputs that are expected and the outcomes that, the company needs, all good. And then the values and the vision become the heart and the core of the culture. And this is how you get consistency across an enterprise, because everybody builds their own subculture in line with the values of the organization. So you see the values everywhere. You just see them in different ways because different people have different roles.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's the top down, the middle management of it, and looking at organisations of it. It's kind of I've been in different project teams in different areas, and I've noticed a different. It is different, and I said to you before, I moved different roles every couple of years or so, and you do have to reset, rethink. But there are some, but then there are some common things that you see played across those. And I see the expectations, and I don't think of it as culture half the time. I just think of it as behaviours, and I perhaps changing my mindset to think about that and thinking, actually, yeah, I'm in a new culture. Actually, is this? And we'll probably get onto the toxic culture. Is this a positive approach to things? Is this as negative? And I probably take it from a focus from me and how it affects me, rather than looking wider at the organisation. And I think there are some some interesting conversations I've seen before now where people have been very robust with each other, and people new to that culture are not used to that robustness. And I'm kind of, that's a bit of behavior. You're holding something to a really high, you're holding someone to your personal values and to your personal, what you think is to be done. And I've kind of said to them, you need to be you need to think about the other people, and not everyone is going to have the same work speed, work pace, work ethic, think about it. And you need to be, because this person I know would get frustrated with lack of progress, with lack of doing everything that he would have done or they would have done. And I kind of talked to him about it, and I'm thinking now about the fact that where I'm looking at that is part of the challenge there, and I was learning to interact with that person, and other people were. Part of the challenge there is that as you come in new, if that's the culture they're used to dealing with, and you're new into that culture, it isn't actually that someone does that. It's a case of that agreement that that's how we behave as a team. And in a project team, you can see that when you have a team that's working and clicking and doing really well. One person leaves and you bring in a new person, and suddenly the gears are crunching. And it's that, sometimes it's those inferred agreements between that team of how we do this. John always does that. Julie always does that. One of those goes out there. This person comes in. Well, I'm not doing that. And then you've got to renegotiate who does what and how you do those things. And it's just making me think there that my thinking should have been around the lines of actually, what, we're a group, we're on a call every day. What is our agreed behaviours? And we did start doing a bit of that actually, because there was certain people expecting a response on something. And this is on a different project, but people expecting responses, and they weren't getting them as quickly as they were expecting. And then everyone said, well, not everyone can do that quickly because they're doing other things, they may not see it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what do we agree? Well, if you haven't got a response, stick it on a board. And if you stick it on the board, on this Jira board or whatever, stick it on the board as being a query. And then in the daily calls, we go, right, what are the new queries? Oh, Jim asked Julie this. Julie, have you got, I can't do it, I'll do that on Tuesday. And then you get that modus operandi that we had, a kind of, if someone's responded to a quick query quickly using different Teams tools. So again, this is about culture as well, I think, where the team were deciding what's the best way to do it. And I've not thought of it in the fact that we were building a culture of that delivery team. It's really interesting. So I have a number of sponsors, affiliate links, in the way that it's set up, that have kindly allowed me to share their services, really. The first one is Mike Clayton, and Mike runs online PM courses, and it is a great resource for getting those fundamentals of project management trained, reasonably priced, and Mike presents it in an accessible and clear manner. You can check out some of his videos on his YouTube channel and kind of give you a view of where they are. But the code for that, if you go to nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, all one word, lowercase, that'll redirect you to it. There's very different levels that you can buy. You can buy individual courses, you can buy pathways as well, if you like. And I get a kickback off those. Mike kindly shares me that. So if you do jump on and use it, I hope you find it really useful. I think he has money back guarantees and things like that as well. So there's a very limited risk on that. So jump on that, and that again, it's nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, and enjoy.